everyone, welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to continue my series where I read weird fiction and combine it with a non-fiction work on a similar topic, and this time I've been feeling cats. Now, if you've been on this channel for a longer period of time, you know that I have two tuxedo cats, Humbert and Cthulhu. And they are very cute, they love each other very much, but you know, Hum is an absolute sweetheart and Cthulhu is absolute chaos, so they kind of balance each other out. I love them so much. And I was just kind of feeling like getting back in touch with them a little bit. So technically this isn't one weird fiction and one nonfiction, it's 3 short stories and 1 nonfiction. So I started with a classic gothic by Edgar Allan Poe called The Black Cat. And this is very short. It follows a character who's a bit disturbed, kind of driven to drink a lot, and he decides to torture and murder a cat and hang it by a tree. And in the process, he also kind of goes mad a little bit and harms and kills his wife and buries her behind this wall. Then it becomes this crime scene investigation. And let's just say that the haunting of the cat has like kind of the last laugh and gets the better of this main character. It's obviously all in the telling. You have this dark atmosphere, you have this character who's just kind of deteriorating both mentally but also physically, and in the telling of the story things become a little bit more and more peculiar, and you start to see this cat as a sort of danger, but you also know that he was also a victim first. I don't know, it's a lot of fun. It's just such a classic, you know, horror story that I think everyone's kind of read it by this point, but it's such a good one to return to. So I'm really glad that I revisited the story. Again, very, very short. And then I read Ancient Sorceries by Algernon Blackwood, and it's just one of the stories in here. Ancient Sorceries is about this man who, through a train station and some weird events, ends up in a town where everybody's personalities and behaviors are very cat-like. And instead of being werewolves, they're kind of were-cats. And things kind of get stranger. He almost falls in love. There's a lot going on. And I think, once more, the weirdness is in the telling. And in this situation, I think the atmosphere didn't hit it for me the way that the story I'm going to discuss next did. So I think there's something about the storytelling techniques of Blackwood that's a little bit more telling you in advance before it actually happens. There's something in the narration style that almost gives things away as you go before you get there. I mean, sometimes I want to call it foreshadowing, but sometimes it's not. It's just kind of outright telling you what's about to happen, kind of ruining the suspense a little bit. And he doesn't take too much time to set the scene in Ancient Sorceries. So I think this might work well to read it in the context of its trilogy of short stories instead of as just looking for the like cat or cat-like element, which is what I was trying to do here. This story also inspired the movie Cat People, so you know, it's got a bigger lore around it, and there's more you can unpack from it. Now, the third story that I've read, which I absolutely loved, this was my favorite, is The Cats of Ulthar. Now, it's not the only place these cats show up. They also make an appearance in The Dream Quest of Unknown Kadath, but I will talk about this in future video on its own, so I don't want to muddy this video up because I just want to stay focused on the cats. But this is part of Lovecraft's dream cycle. So he has his dream cycle and his Cthulhu mythos, and then there's like kind of multiple Venn diagrams going on because there are some stories that overlap in both these realms, and then there's stories written by other people that fit into the Cthulhu mythos that are not necessarily Lovecraft. So anyway, long story short, The Cats of Ulthar is highly atmospheric, and I love it. It's like one of those perfect stories to read in the fall. But to me, it reads like a fairy tale. I think this is Lovecraft's fairy tale. I can understand why he loved it so much and it was one of his favorites that he's written. But in this town, Ulthar, there's this couple that loves to torture and kill cats, and a little boy comes into town and he has a little kitten and he loves it so much and he's so innocent, and this couple decide to murder this cat, and the little boy makes a prayer, wishes upon a star, and suddenly all of these people disappear. And the moral at the end is there's a reason why no one can harm a cat in Ulthard. There's weird thing going on, and the cats are very mysterious and they lurk around and they kind of run the show there. They have a lot of power in their character and the way that they're described in this fairy tale. I'm gonna keep calling it a fairy tale. Do let me know if you thought it kind of read like a fairy tale, because I can't be alone in this. But I just enjoyed it in the telling. It was beautifully written. It has multiple layers. And I liked that it focused a little bit on kind of the moral of the story and lesson learned, but it centralized the cats in a way that I really enjoyed, where you don't dwell too much on their torture, but you do kind of enjoy the sweet revenge of the karmic universe. It's kind of nice. And again, this is also very short, so you might be able to read it. I think there's also a pretty cool audiobook / video made on YouTube. If I find it, I'll link it down below. And the imagery with the audio work really well together. So if you have a couple of minutes, I highly recommend. Before I get to my nonfiction book, I did take a break and I went to the museum, because our local museum at the moment has an exhibit specifically on cats. And I was so intrigued to go and see and learn all about cats after having read these 3 stories. So the majority of the exhibit did focus on all kinds of cats, and it kind of took attention away from the main kind of household cat, because tigers were involved and lions, and by extension the Sphinx. But it had elements of, ancient Egypt and cat worship in history, and a lot of elements of what cats mean in our society. Do I wish it was mostly on house cats in general? Yes, but it was fascinating nonetheless, and I got to learn a lot, and it was really cool. I also learned here that Toni Morrison had a cat. I know that Taylor Swift is famously known for her cats, but I went home, did a little more research. I found out that some of my favorite authors are cat people, and especially the sort of recluse, weird, obscure, creepy sort of writers. Brings us to another eccentric individual. So this book is called Catland, and this is about Louis Wain and the Great Cat Mania by Kathryn Hughes. I have read one of her books on Victorians back in 2018 or 19 during Victober or nonfiction November, or I tried to blend the two. And I remember enjoying that as well. But in this book, she focuses on 2 things side by side. So the rise of cat love and the popularity of Louis Wain and his paintings. So the way she sets the scene is that prior to Louis Wain, and I don't know if he can take credit entirely, because as we've seen, there were people around who did fancy cats in pet-like manners, or as companions, or as something a little bit more. But the way she presents this is that cats were not necessarily house pets. They weren't necessarily loved. In the beginning, she actually starts by telling you a lot of the ways that cats were known to have been tortured by people, especially young boys. And the way, like, some of the stuff she describes about what people would do to cats is horrifying. Like, again, just like in the last video on weird fiction paired up with nonfiction, somehow the nonfiction ends up being slightly more horrifying than the horror and the weird fiction. So yeah, if you have a strong stomach, you can make it through the beginning when she sets the tone. I can't really stand listening to people torture animals, so that was kind of heartbreaking. What we get is that once Louis Wain was born in the late Victorian period, he starts drawing anthropomorphic cats, and their publication becomes so popular that people start to see them as one of us. They start to connect to cats a little bit more and see them for more than just their function, which is to catch mice around the yard or around the neighborhood, right? So now people are kind of having cats as pets for the first time, similar to the way they would have a dog. So she kind of connects these 2 worlds together. And Louis Wain was just, he had such a sad life. He lost his partner early on, and he had a lot of responsibilities, but the most important part is that his mental health started to really deteriorate, and he has a lot of experiences in different asylums and mental health hospitals, and you get an image of a very dark side of history, because as whimsical as he was and as fun as his paintings were, this side of history when it came to mental health awareness was just like, people were just not very well informed. And one of the things that's noteworthy is that his art started to resemble early psychedelic art, which became more popular in the 1960s. But you kind of see a glimpse of that here too. It's kind of like a very trippy, like drop acid, do shrooms, and paint lots of colors kind of art. But he did it early on. And some studies show that it might be connected to the fact that he could have had schizophrenia. And it wasn't super diagnosable at the time. And near the end of the book, we get the sense that some researchers were going in, looking at his art and using it side by side with some of other patients' artwork and trying to connect some dots. There's a little bit of speculation near the end, but there's a lot we don't know. So I think the author of this book did an amazing job kind of highlighting both this figure and the kind of love of cats in mainstream society and how it came to be. So it all comes together in a beautiful way. And after I read this, I looked up something about Louis Wain, and then I found out that this book inspired a movie just a few years ago where Benedict Cumberbatch is playing Louis Wain. And I think the actress who played young Elizabeth II in The Crown is playing his partner. And I watched it, but I found it a bit disjointed. They tried to do too many things, in my opinion. As always, Hollywood tends to centralize the love story above all else, even though it didn't last very long, and make it kind of the heart and core of this story, which is not as central in the book. And I think maybe Cumberbatch has had a similar role too many times that you kind of see it as a typecast in many ways. And I think the story could have been told in a more memorable way. And they tried to do like oh, look how eccentric he is, and he would just go around and say, I want the cats to be electrical. I don't know. It was an interesting biopic. I don't know if I'd recommend it per se, but the book was really good. And if you're looking for something to read for both, I don't know, Victober and nonfiction November, this might work. It definitely worked out with my weird fiction pairing and my cat love, but I will now put some cats aside and move on to the next topic. So I will see you in a future video. Bye!